This episode of Supersonic Countdown is brought to you by seasonal allergies. Nobody likes them, but you have to deal with them anyway, so have fun. Anyway, welcome to the third installment of the Supersonic Countdown, where we count down to the release of Sonic Frontiers, and what a better way to do so than celebrating the history of the series by chronologically talking about all the mainline series games. I ain't got any better ideas, so shut up. Anyway, so last night we talked about Sonic CD and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, in the order of their stories. So what I mean by this is CD is technically the prequel to Sonic 2, even though in terms of its release date, it came out after that game. Because whenever CD came out, that was whenever the Sega CD came out, so, yeah. Anyway, like I said just earlier, seasonal allergies, they suck. And even though my phone literally said today that the air quality was good, I don't believe it. It's also because of the fact that but the weather has been so weird lately, you know? Like, we've had nice sunny weather, and then today we had cloudy weather with a few breaks of sunshine. And then tomorrow we're going to have some frickin' rain, which hopefully it won't interfere with tomorrow's episode, which, spoiler alert, talks about a transition into 3D that is totally rough. Yes, that was a joke. Shut up. Not literally. I don't know. Anyway, with that being said, let's get to the subject at hand, which is Sonic 3 and Knuckles. So, what can I say about this game series? Or this game, huh? Well, for one, as it turns out, there's also a Sonic movie coming out in about 2 years under the same name. But we're talking about the video game. Or rather, video games. Because technically, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, or Sonic and Knuckles, are technically two separate titles. But I'll explain as to why that is. So, essentially, as it says here, Sonic the Hedgehog 3, or simply known as Sonic 3, or Sonic 3, numerals, is a platform video game in the Sonic the Hedgehog series developed by Sonic Team by Sega, and published by Sega. It was released as a sequel to Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The continuation, Sonic and Knuckles, was later released in the same year, which picks up the story directly after the end of Sonic 3. Lock-on technology allows people to play Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Sonic and Knuckles as a combined Sonic 3 and Knuckles. And the two are actually two parts of the same game. Basically, think of it sort of like DLC before DLC, only the DLC itself is a full game. Or in other words, think of it sort of like Sonic 3 Part 1, Sonic 3 Part 2. This marks the first appearance of Knuckles the Echidna. More on that guy in a little bit, but we talked about him briefly last night. Originally, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was meant to contain all of the levels that Sonic and Knuckles had, but the game couldn't be finished in time, so it was split into two. So, yeah. It was released for the Mega Drive / Sega Genesis, first in the US on February 2nd, 94. Literally a little over 3 years before I was born, guys. Wow. Followed by February 24th, 1994, and finally the 27th of May that same year. So, obviously, as a sequel to Sonic 2, it expands the lore of the series in various different ways. For one, it introduces a mainstay of the series in the form of Angel Island. Yeah, Angel Island. And believe it or not, that island actually is very important to the upcoming Sonic game, Sonic Frontiers. You're probably wondering why, but you'll see. Well, you'll see whenever you look on YouTube. I've seen countless react videos to the actual video of that subject matter. I'm not going to do the same thing. I'm not saying I hate react content. I just don't really care much for it. Plus, it's just going to get, drowned out with all the other people. And I'm not trying to sound like I'm jealous or anything, because I'm really not. But, alongside talking about this game, I'm also going to be talking about some, controversy. You're probably wondering, what controversy? Well, there's quite a few things. And you can already see one of them right here. See that uncredited? Yeah. Michael frickin' Jackson was one of the people who helped work on the soundtrack for the game. Now, he remained uncredited, which many people maybe contributed to the fact that he was in a little bit of controversy himself because, he was thought to be a pedophile, but I don't think that was ever proven. I'm not going to go into that, though, because I don't want to bring any dark subject matter to the For Place channel. Yeah, anyway, so there's also Brad Buxer. And here's a fun fact about Brad Buxer himself. So he made an album called Hard Times from a band called the Jetsons. That's Jetzons, not Jetsons like the cartoon. God, I missed that show. But his song Hard Times is actually, well, yeah. Oh, right, here it is. Alright. Right. So, you're probably wondering, well, what does this game introduce to the series that would go on to be a major part of the Sonic lore? Well, we already know about Eggman, we know about Sonic and Tails, but what about our friend Knuckles the Echidna, huh? Knuckles is first introduced in this game, I think. Yeah, he was. There's also another game called... Excuse me. Knuckles Chaotix. Which... Yeah, it came out after Sonic 3. Because it came out in 95. But in terms of like his first official appearance in the series, it was Sonic 3. But here's the thing. So, there was a little bit of controversy, not regarding Knuckles himself, necessarily, but his species. You're probably wondering, well, wait, how? Why? What is it? Let's just say that, there is a certain person by the name of, Ken Penders, and, he tried to claim ownership of Knuckles and the echidnas himself, claiming that they're his creation. They are not. Because otherwise Knuckles wouldn't even be in the series anymore after his inclusion in the early games. So, yeah. Sorry, Ken Penders, but you don't own this dude or any of his characters. But here's another thing. Trying to find it. Oh, I think it's the Archie ones. Notes. Trying to find the thing. Oh, here it is. So, you're probably wondering why the echidnas are so important to Sonic in terms of, like, some controversy. So, let me explain something real quick. Alright. Archie Comics once had a certain somebody who, yeah. Here he is. This guy right here, you have no idea how much of a pain in the butt he has been to Sega. You're probably wondering, well, how? Well, between January 9th of January 2009 and October 2015, Penders created or directed a series of lawsuits and legal cases against Sega and Archie Comics related to the characters or the rights of his characters in the Sonic comics. Let's just say that because of this, now you know why there's pre and post Super Genesis Wave. Now, granted, I've never read the comics, although I have seen snippets of them and they're really good. But here's the thing. Basically, this dork of a guy, quite literally, tried to claim Knuckles as his own creation, and he tried to claim the echidnas, like the actual species, as his own creation, when quite literally that wouldn't stick because the echidnas, in terms of the character species, were created by Sega, not Kenneth W. Penders II. But yeah, so he is not a good person. He never was a good person. And, Yeah, so anyway, yeah, so here's another thing. Because of Ken Penders, because of him, Sega had to remove various pieces of lore from Sonic. And one of those examples was that yeah, so Sonic is not allowed to show excessive emotion. That has extended to the video games, which sucks because emotions are what make people human, you know? But, yeah. Now, Sonic was not allowed to lose. I mean, that kind of makes sense because he's the hero, but, I feel like with Sonic Frontiers that might be lifted off, hopefully. Because if you think about it, it makes sense that, you know, like, given how Frontiers itself is meant to be a darker and more serious game, it makes absolute sense. But what I will say, however, is that because of this loser right here, and look, I don't mean to be a mean person, but Ken Penders has caused so much trouble for Sonic the Hedgehog. Not just for the series in terms of the comics, but for the character as a whole. Because he's made it to where certain things that Sonic was originally allowed to do could no longer be done. And that's pretty stupid when you think about it, because this guy tried to act like, oh, I own Knuckles, I own all this stuff. He doesn't. He does not own Knuckles, he does not own the Echidnas, he doesn't own anything of Sonic. So the fact that he's trying to claim some characters as his own, even though they are technically property of Sega, yeah, he's caused more trouble than good. But, getting back to the original subject at hand, I was trying to, so I was trying to talk about Knuckles and his species and stuff. But Sonic 3 introduced Knuckles the Echidna, not just as a new character to the series as a whole, but as a playable character. And with his introduction, you were able to climb walls, you were able to glide for good amounts of distances. Unlike the early 3D games like Sonic Adventures 1 and 2, and I'm pretty sure Sonic 06, God bless its soul, I'm pretty sure those games allowed Knuckles to dig, or that game did. Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, obviously, yeah. But the thing is, though, why Knuckles is so important is because he plays the role of a protector. As in, he was given the duty of protecting the Master Emerald of Angel Island. this beautiful glistening gem right here on this floating island in the sky. And yeah, so the island itself doesn't appear in Sonic Frontiers itself, but it does technically appear in something that has to do with Frontiers, and that would be the prologue. Divergence. So we have convergence and then divergence. Also, shout out to Tyson Hess for directing, Jasmine Hernandez for producing, Sega, of course, is the production company, and of course our man Ian Flynn, the best person in the world, because unlike Ken Penders, he is not trying to claim ownership of the characters, he is doing them, a due diligence. But it is so amazing that this returns Knuckles back to what he once was. Now you're probably thinking, well wait, why do you say that? It's because of the fact that ever since 2011, whenever Sonic Generations came out, Knuckles was sort of a side character. He was set off to the side alongside the other characters because they wanted to put more focus on, our boy in blue, Sonic the Hedgehog. But in doing so, they sort of dehumanized the characters into having a one-dimensional attitude. So Amy was the typical, oh, I love Sonic, I'm invested in Sonic, I want to marry him. Like, she was, the typical, what's the word? Obsessive girlfriend kind of character, although Sonic and Amy aren't boyfriend and girlfriend at all. Although Sonic does care for her, as any good friend would. Tails was turned from his smart, sometimes brave, and very clever twin-tailed foxboy self into a still kind of a genius, but at the same time was very cowardly. For example, Sonic, help me! And then Knuckles here, for the longest time, was seen as a dim-witted dude who was just, oh, I'm strong! And that's it, because, if you didn't know already, the people who wrote the Sonic stories from Sonic Colors to Sonic Forces, and I'm talking about the mainline games, I know that they also wrote TSR, which TSR is not a mainline game, so that's why I'm not including it. Although it may have some references to previous games, but it itself is not a mainline game. It is a spin-off. A very good spin-off, though. It's the one good game that was made by Pontac and Graff. But other than that, it was, yeah. But Knuckles, because of this new animation that came out, it personifies Knuckles back to what he once was. The character that, to many long-term Sonic fans who may remember first seeing him in the Genesis era, the early 3D days on the Dreamcast, even growing up prior to the Pontac and Graff situation, Knuckles was seen as a stoic character who, despite his lonesome attitude where he preferred to do things alone, and, he always preferred to protect his home and the Master Emerald, it's great to see that they're bringing him back to that. Because for the longest time, Knuckles, because of the Pontac and Graff situation, he never did do any of that. He was just there, but he was seen as a somewhat dim-witted tough guy So the fact that Ian Flynn has rewritten Knuckles back to where he once was prior to the Pontac and Graf situation, it's absolutely astounding that that we actually got Knuckles back to where he once was in terms of his characterization. And I'm really, really glad that, yeah. But moreover, I just want to emphasize this by saying that as we begin to get closer and closer to what is undoubtedly going to be a bright new future for Sonic, not just because it's a brand new era and a new generation for Sonic, but as we enter a new phase of Sonic that's looking to be a bright new future where the games are being written by someone who actually knows the ins and outs of Sonic, the character, Sonic the franchise, Sonic the game series, Sonic the everything. Ian Flynn, without a doubt, knows how to treat these characters correctly. He knows how to correctly personify them how Sega originally envisioned them way back in the 90s and the early 2000s, prior to the Pontac and Graf situation that I kept referencing before. So the fact that Knuckles here, and I just want to preference this, or I don't know how you say that. I just want to say this. Knuckles is still voiced by David B. Mitchell. In fact, he started voicing Knuckles starting in 2019. Starting off in Adventure 1, he was voiced by Michael Gahorn. Ryan Drummond briefly voiced him, but just for one game. There was Scott Dreyer, Dan Green, Travis Willingham, and that was up until after Forces. And then we have Dave B. Mitchell, who, from what I heard, is extremely good at how he's voicing Knuckles. But not only that, the fact that Ian Flynn was able to write Knuckles correctly, because, again, he knows the ins and outs of Sonic. Everything about Sonic he knows. Partially because, as a super fan of the Sonic series, and, since he probably has followed it since day one, he obviously knows everything there is to know about Sonic. From the lore of the locations, to the characters, to the various artifacts, and whatever else there is. He knows everything about these characters, and he knows how to bring them back to life. And what I mean by this is whenever Pontac and Graf were writing for the games felt kind of lifeless for the other characters, and Sonic was just seen as this cheesy one-line spouting blue speedy hedgehog that just loved making jokes like baldy nose hair. And that's not to say it's the fault of the voice actors at all, because Roger Craig Smith is a fantastic voice actor. He is fantastic at what he does. But from what I have heard in Sonic Frontiers, it finally gives him a real chance to shine. Because for the past several games, you've seen brief glimpses of what could be a good Sonic, but it's marred by terrible writing and terrible voice direction. But in this case, with Sonic Frontiers, the voice direction is actually being done correctly. And that's for all the other characters. And so, judging by the voice direction being done extremely well and being, very believable in terms of, what it's trying to do and convey, I have no doubt that the characters are going to behave like how they once did way back in the days of old. And so I am extremely excited. Sorry about that. Long day. I am extremely excited to see this guy being back to his former glory. To see Sonic back to his former glory. To see everybody back to their former glory in this series. It's something that we as a collective community of Sonic fans have been wanting for the longest time. And here we are, 5 years after Forces, which I should say that Frontiers itself is not a sequel. It is its own story. It is not a sequel of any means at all. It is its own thing, and the reason why I say this is because since it's the beginning of a new Sonic generation, and I'm not trying to make a reference to the game itself, but the thing is, it says it here, it says it best. This game was created with the intention by Sonic Team to have the game set a new template for the future games to follow, similar to how Sonic Adventure went from the 2D era to the 3D, otherwise known as Sonic had a rough transition into 3D, when he didn't. Because Mario had the same issues as well. Like any video game franchise that starts off in 2D and going into 3D, they're going to have their own problems, but they're going to smooth them out as time progresses. It may take some time to get used to it, but with time, it'll become a great product. But yeah, anyway, so Sonic Frontiers itself is literally its own story. It's not a sequel of any means. It's literally a return to form. Think of it sort of like they're just pretending that the Pontac and Graph games that were written don't exist. Because if you notice, it doesn't say anything about preceded by or succeeded by or anything like that. Partially because it's the first game in a new era of Sonic. The open zone format. But the thing about the open zone format is that not only does it unlock a new generation for Sonic to explore in, but it opens up a whole new can of possibilities for our speedy little hero here to, envision, Because here's the thing. Takashi Iizuka, the creative director of Sonic the Hedgehog, he literally said that if this game does well, it could serve as essentially the core DNA that is necessary to continue a series that many people have been wanting to have continued. Sonic Adventure. Because if you think about it, it's a duology. And typically when you see something like this, we've been wanting a trilogy, And what a better way to introduce the third game in the series than with Sonic Frontiers serving as the backbone, the sort of template for how that game would turn out to be. because they could have returning mechanics. Like, they could keep the drop dash from this game, which, yes, it has a drop dash, which is awesome. Which I think is really cool. And if you want to know how to do that, basically, you just press and hold the jump button after you do a double jump, which is really awesome. Yeah, there it is. But the thing is, what I really like is that the drop dash is technically an attack. So quite literally, in a sense, they brought back the spin dash. It's not the actual spin dash where you're staying in place and revving up, but it's a good start. It's a good thing to see that Sega is at least mindful that some people want to see the spin dash return in some way, shape, or form. But not only that, but it does have the ability to damage enemies. However, something else that I should note, that's also in the controls, you can boost, but here's the thing. Boosting in Sonic Frontiers does not damage enemies at all. In fact, the reason why they even have the boost in Frontiers is partially because of just how large the game's world is. Because the thing is, the open zone format that they're doing for this game, along with it bringing in a new era of Sonic, it makes sense why they call it an open zone. Because each island is sort of like its own biome, sort of like how the old games like Sonic 1, 2, and 3, they would have their own zones that you go through, and you would play through those. In this case, however, the islands are the zones, and you would have different levels that you would play through in the form of cyberspace. And what I really like is that the boost in this game, it's more like a stamina meter, where you don't have to worry about defeating enemies in order to gain boost. It refills on its own. And I really, really like that. So, there's no like glowing aura behind Sonic unless you have maxed out rings. You can't damage enemies. And not only that, but boosting itself will, like, the boost itself will be amplified where, if you have the maximum amount of rings that Sonic can carry, you'll be able to have a power boost where, the rings on the heads-up display will actually have, like, a sort of sparkling electric effect on them, like the actual number and everything. And as it says here, there will be a animation that plays where Sonic opens his eyes and they have a blue glow. And what's really cool about it is it doesn't damage enemies, but what it does do is it amplifies how fast you can run while boosting. So it's sort of more akin to actual boosting in the previous games while still not being an overpowered bulldozer of a move. It's more just a way of traversal. There is fast travel though, which is great. And I really, really like that. But not only that, there's plenty of other moves that are in the game as well. Like, of course, there's wall jumping, there's all this other stuff. But the thing I absolutely love, however, is the fact that Sonic Team actually took the time to care for this game. And I want to explain what I mean by this. initially, this game was set to launch sometime last year, most likely in November, seeing as how traditionally Sonic games are released during the holiday season to make sure that they could sell a good amount of copies during the holidays, like on Christmas. However, Takashi Iizuka, being the absolute awesome dude he is, he stood up to Sega and demanded that they get an extra year of development to make sure that they have plenty of time to work on everything that they can to make sure this game is absolutely perfect for launch. And as luck would have it, we are about to be 4 days away, so that's pretty good, right? But I absolutely love how this game is shaping up to be. For one, you don't have to worry about the Sonic characters being the typical one-liner spewing, dim-witted tough guy, cowardly little fox boy, overly obsessive girlfriend stuff. No. This is bringing the characters back to their roots, with Sonic being how he originally was in the first place. Caring for his friends, always willing to do the right thing. He still has a little bit of snarkiness to him. Like, for example, in a gameplay video that I saw once, he said, "Ooh, cool web mirror thing." But it's not meant to be a joke, it's just him making an observation about the environment. And he also makes a observation about a tall tower, saying, "Oh man, that thing is tall." Or he says something about climbing it and betting that it's a nice view. And I absolutely love how they have taken the effort to bring these characters back to how they were way back in the past. So, to see that Sega is doing all of this to make sure that the game itself is what the Sonic fandom as a whole would want, I am absolutely thrilled. So, I will say this, sorry for deviating from the topic about, Sonic 3, but getting back to Knuckles, he was first introduced in Sonic 3, and it was also introduced that he came from the island Angel Island. And as it turns out, this was where you would find out about the Master Emerald, which is, as it says here, a powerful ancient artifact on Angel Island. The thing is, Angel Island since that day, or since that game, has appeared in other games since. It's appeared in in those games, obviously. Sonic Adventure 1, it's been mentioned in Sonic Adventure 2 and the Battle Port. It's in Sonic Advance, Pinball Party, SADX. If you get that game on PC, I highly recommend getting the Dreamcast conversion mod. Heroes, it's mentioned there. Sonic Advance 3. It's mentioned in Brawl. It's seen in Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Oh, God. Yeah, so this game was also fueling the fire for the Penders situation. But the less said about that, the better. Let's see, Sonic Adventure 2010, that's a re-release of a re-release. Basically what I'm saying is a majority of the Sonic games it's appeared in. Except Forces. Which sucks. It wasn't in unleashed as well, but that's okay. But I will say this. I am so glad that they're bringing this island's lore back. And not only that, but what I really, really like about all this is that in the Sonic Frontiers prologue, they fleshed out the lore of the island itself. And they even fleshed out the lore of what Knuckles does on the island. Because up until that point, a lot of people would have most likely assumed that, hey, Knuckles just sits in one spot pretty much every day and night watching over the Master Emerald, just sitting there. Instead, he doesn't just sit there and watch the Emerald. He also takes the time to explore the island to see whatever is going on in the various different areas, such as Sky Sanctuary, Lava Reef, all that other stuff. And I'm really, really glad that Sega took the time to flesh out the island and its protector in a way that would make it much more grounded in reality in terms of like its own lore. So, yeah. Yeah, so the game also introduced Angel Island, the various locations you go through. And not only that, but it also introduced something that would only be in that game, and that would be the Hyper Emeralds, which were only in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Oh wait, no, that's never mind. Alright. Anyway. Oh. Oh, here it is. So, Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the only game, and yes, I'm counting it as a game, where you would have hyperforms. For Sonic, he had a rainbow sort of effect, otherwise known as seizure-inducing hedgehogs. You love them, but you also don't love them. But yeah. But it has been theorized that he'll also be in Sonic Frontiers. But I don't know. But at the same time, as it says here, Takashi Iizuka doesn't think that Sonic will ever be hypersonic again. But honestly, I'm perfectly fine with whatever they end up doing for Sonic Frontiers. Because here's the thing. For most of the more recent games, like Generations, there was kind of a plot element for being supersonic. But in the other games, it was just more like, hey, it's a DLC, have fun. But, yeah. But anyway, so for the first time in quite a long time, quite literally, Sonic Frontiers will let you collect Chaos Emeralds for an actual plot reason. And that is that at the end of each island, whenever you're actually progressing through the game, there will be a large boss like, I think there's this one Neon Genesis Evangelion kind of boss called Giganto. And what's cool is that you would actually have an emerald on the very top of him that you would collect. And if you collected the other emeralds, you would be able to become supersonic and become powerful enough to defeat Giganto. And it's really, really cool. Yeah, so, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, so we had Supersonic in that game in Sonic 3, but we also had Hypersonic, but that was only in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. But the main point that I'm trying to say is that Sonic 3 and Knuckles introduced not only a new location in Sonic's history, but it also introduced... What the... Anyway, it also introduced a new, albeit one-time mechanic, but it was still very fascinating because how you would get the hyper forms of the characters is that you would get the Chaos Emeralds, and then eventually you would have to do these different challenges in order to get a Super Emerald. And by doing all the Super Emeralds, you would be able to unlock Hypersonic, Hyper Tails, or Hyper Knuckles, respectively. And those would end up being like the super forms of those characters on steroids. But, yeah. Anyway, so... yeah. Also, is anyone else excited for this? Because I sure am. Anyway, so, yeah. Anyway, with that being said, that'll do it for tonight's stream. Join me back tomorrow for a very special little talk about a certain 3D game, which I actually have a copy of, and not just on PC. Yeah. And yes, I will be doing gameplay of it, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have the audio of the game muted so that way you can hear me, so that way I could talk about it. But all I'm gonna be doing is just running around mainly. But yeah. So with that being said, thank you very much for stopping by if you did. But if you haven't, then that's fine as well. But if you have enjoyed this, then please like, comment, and subscribe, as well as turn on notifications. That way you won't miss anything. None of that is required by any means, but it's certainly appreciated. But with any case, I hope you have enjoyed this, and I'll see you all later.